welcome back to Hanna Worldwide and Friends, the podcast about living abroad. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you so much for your support. And I also want to shout out a big thank you for everyone who has been already part of this podcast. If you want to be notified if there's a new episode, please go to Spotify and hit the bell. Welcome to today's episode, where I want to discuss a bit about the differences I have noticed between my home country Germany and New Zealand. First of all, I would say that the people here are very, very open, very friendly, really chatty. Everyone is saying hi to each other. It feels a little bit more like a village. And since I grew up in a small town and then later on in a village with really just 250 people, I kind of loved that mentality. Everyone is saying hi. People are not just staring at each other like judging. And what I've noticed for the first time going back to Germany after I have lived here for not quite a year, but quite a while, to see how the mentality of the people is here, I've noticed that it got me to see that people in Germany are generally not that open. Of course, it's not everyone, but what I've seen is all my friends who are traveling and are open-minded are a little bit different from people who have lived in a small town or at one place for a very long time. I don't want to say they are not open-minded, but what I have seen so far is that people who are traveling or who have a lot of diversity in their friend circle, it's really, really different how they see things, how they discuss things, and how open they are to just welcome other people. And so once I went back to my little hometown, it was interesting to see that I went out with my mum for brunch. And I love brunching. That's actually a part I really miss here in New Zealand, going out for a nice breakfast kind of buffet. But we went out for brunch at a bakery, and it used to be that they would come to you and they would serve you, and you feel like, you are a customer, you are like important. And all these things have been changed as well. I mean, it's really common in the world today that actually you order, you pay, and you grab it yourself. And there's nothing wrong with it. But when we went in and we ordered, the person behind the counter was just so unbelievable unfriendly. She must have had a either tough day or has a tough time at home. Yeah, or just is relatively negative. Obviously, everyone has their own story and we don't know about it, but just the massive difference of openness and friendliness in that moment was shocking. I was telling my mom, wow, that's so unfriendly. Like, she's been so rude. And she was like, well, welcome, I get back to Germany. Like, you're not in New Zealand anymore. And that was a thing was quite eye-opening. Also, I start joking around. Everyone thinks Germans are really strict, really on time always, and harsh and more like that, which is, yes, in some cases true, but not always. And it was really, really interesting to see that people here would start making jokes. And I would always say, like, that's why I left the country, because I was too friendly or they didn't want me there. I was always like happy, which is obviously not true. But it was just really obvious to see that the difference between New Zealander are generally more open. And obviously, it's also not every New Zealander and it's also not every German person. But it is definitely a thing you can feel. So that's fact number 1. Number 2, I went back to Germany just last year in August 2022. And at one time, I realized even more than ever that toilets in New Zealand are mostly free. I haven't found a toilet yet which was public and I had to pay, or even in a restaurant or in a cafe or anything like that. So I would say you can't always find a toilet immediately because you have a lot of land and farms and they are owned by everyone. So you can't just always go there or pee on the side of the street. That's not a thing here. But you don't need to pay. And when I went back to Germany again, it was no matter where. I went to Cologne, I went to Hamburg, I went to my hometown, Neustrelitz. And you always had to pay something, either 50 cents or €1. And it's not really a thing here, which leads me to the next point. You don't really carry cash anymore. There's no reason for you to carry any cash in New Zealand. You can always pay via your card, credit card, debit card. You don't need to carry any cash. And so I ended up usually not having any cash. That's just a normal thing. And it becomes so weird to actually own or have cash in your pocket and to spend it, because it's not necessary and everything is automated. You can everywhere just get your pay wave. And going back again, seeing that most of the time you really need to have cash. Often you can't even pay with cards. And it was shocking even in Berlin, which is the major city. How can we really force people from overseas, who probably also don't really carry any cash, to have cash all the time? It's like now, since I have been living in New Zealand for so long, it's so awkward. It's so unnecessary. And everyone asks me, why is that? And I can't really even give you an answer. But I can just tell, like, it's so much easier to not needing to carry cash all the time. So I haven't been to the ATM that often in the last few years. Crazy. The next thing I've noticed is also money related. And it is that you don't have to tip in a restaurant or anywhere. So coming to New Zealand, I remember I was quite new. I went out with a friend to the restaurant and I wanted to give some tip, because that's just everywhere pretty normal. It is normal in Germany, it's normal in America. And so you would be considered super rude to not give any tip. And in that case, I was going to the restaurant with a friend, having my food, and then wanting to give tip. And that person just didn't want to accept my tip. And I was wondering, why? What's wrong? That person even offered me to get my number rather than the tip, which was another interesting story. But in that moment, it was so weird because I didn't know why and I didn't know it's a thing. And so I think it's even considered rude if I'm not wrong. But it's just not a thing. So I took it back and I didn't end up giving that person my number. Just side thing. So you don't go anywhere and you don't tip. You pay the price, which is there. You don't need to feel bad. You just need to remember, when you go back into your own country or somewhere else, please do tip. Don't forget to tip. People will be really angry, and it is definitely considered rude in most of the countries. So here it's a thing to not do it, and that's fine, and you will get used to it, but don't forget it somewhere else. Next thing is cost of living here in New Zealand. And maybe that's why it's already so high that, certain things are just crazy. New Zealand is a small island and export is really big, import is really big. So everything is really, really expensive. I remember at one point I was in the first few months on South Island and I saw a capsicum for $13. And that was shocking. Just so many things which are so much more expensive over here. And me knowing how the prices could be in Germany for certain things, I just don't really want to spend that money. So that's another thing. Also, housing market. It is really, really normal to own a house here if you can afford it. It's not that common to have apartments. And I would prefer, I do love houses here, but I would prefer to live in a small apartment by myself than needing to live in a house where you flat, which means you are like in a living kind of situation where you have all kinds of people living together and you don't necessarily know them. You don't necessarily like them, but you spend most of the time at home with them. So that can be really helpful, especially when you are new and you go overseas by yourself and you don't know anyone. In that case, it can be really nice to sometimes have someone to talk to sometimes just build new friendships, but also it is sometimes really annoying. I remember I had one flatmate who started stealing, so he would steal our food, he would take stuff, and that was just a really bad experience. Yeah, I would totally enjoy it more to have a little apartment where I can be by myself or with my partner and not having to share a house. But if you actually find nice people and you enjoy living with them, then having a house rather than a flat can be pretty cool. You have like a little backyard, you can do barbecues and all of that. So it has its perks. But on the other hand, the housing prices are so high, and with COVID, it just really skyrocketed. And now it's slowly coming down again. But for a normal house, maybe 4 bedrooms, around 1,200,000, it's just not possible. I can't afford it. A lot of other people can't afford it. And that's where the problems start. So, but you grow up with the goal of one day not flatting anymore, but owning your own house. So last but not least, New Zealand is an island in the middle of an ocean. Yes, Australia is relatively close by and all the other islands around, but it is part of the Ring of Fire, and natural catastrophes are pretty common here. Most common are earthquakes. I haven't felt it before, but my phone would always notify me and tell me there has been an earthquake. This is the level, this is the number, the intensity. And I just didn't know that from Germany. Germany is really safe, barely has any natural catastrophes. It can be really cold with snow, it can be rainy, it can be hot, but we wouldn't have any tsunamis or earthquakes or anything like that. In that case, it was really new to me. And I always said, oh, I haven't felt an earthquake yet. And on one hand, I don't want to, because it always means like there's a risk of destruction and a risk of people get hurt or lose their homes or anything like that. But on the other hand, I was always curious. And so a few weeks ago, it was actually my very first earthquake I really felt. And I was sleeping and all of a sudden the bed started shaking. And it was just for maybe 30 seconds or something, like not for long. But I woke up from it and I looked at my partner and I was like realizing it was an earthquake, not freaking out. And one moment I was like, oh my God, that's my first earthquake. And I can feel it. And then my thoughts shifted and were like, oh my God, it's an earthquake. Like, oh my God. It stopped immediately and everything was all right. But it was really my very first earthquake I could feel. And that makes it real to live in an area where earthquakes are quite common and where it's normal. So that's one last difference between New Zealand and Germany for today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Please connect with me if you want to, or rate me on Spotify. And leave a comment if you have anything to say, give me feedback. And yeah, thank you very much and see you soon.